The evening air carried a chill that seeped through Elaine Chen's thin jacket as she walked the familiar path through Oakwood Cemetery. Her hands clutched a small bunch of wildflowers, the same kind her son Liam used to pick during their Sunday walks in the park. 3 years had passed since she lost him, but the weight of his absence felt just as heavy as the day he left. Elaine checked her watch, 11:30 p.m. She had never stayed this late before, but tonight was different. Tonight marked exactly 3 years since Liam had taken his last breath. His small hand gripped tightly in hers as he whispered, "It's okay, Mom. Don't be sad." The cemetery was eerily quiet. Most people visited during daylight hours, bringing flowers and prayers before returning to their lives. But grief doesn't follow normal hours, and tonight Elaine couldn't bear to be anywhere else. "I should have brought a flashlight," she muttered to herself as she navigated between the graves, guided only by the full moon hanging overhead. Its silvery light cast long shadows across the ground, transforming the peaceful resting place into something more mysterious. Liam's grave sat under an old oak tree at the far end of the cemetery. Elaine had chosen this spot because Liam loved climbing trees, always the first to reach the highest branches, fearless in a way she never was. The small tombstone was simple. Liam Chen, beloved son, forever 7, forever loved. Elaine sat on the damp grass beside the grave and arranged the wildflowers in the small vase embedded in the ground. "Hey, buddy," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "It's been 3 years today. I still expect to hear you running down the hallway every morning." She wiped away a tear. "Your dad called yesterday. He's doing okay. Still in Boston with his new job. Her voice trailed off. What was the point in telling Liam about Robert's new life? About how quickly he had seemed to move on while she remained frozen in time? The night grew colder, and Elaine pulled her jacket tighter. She should go home, try to sleep, face another day tomorrow. But something kept her rooted to the spot. Maybe it was the fullness of the moon or the unusual stillness of the air. Not even a leaf rustled in the old oak above. She checked her watch again. 11:58 p.m. "I should go," she whispered, but didn't move. The distant church bell began to toll. Midnight. Elaine counted each heavy gong as it echoed across the cemetery. 1, 2, 3. By the 6th toll, she noticed something strange. A faint blue light seemed to be coming from the ground, from Liam's grave itself. What on earth? Elaine blinked, wondering if her tired eyes were playing tricks. The bell continued. 7, 8, 9. The blue glow grew stronger with each toll, emanating from the edges of the tombstone like water seeping through cracks. 10, 11, 12. As the final bell faded into silence, Liam's entire grave was bathed in a gentle blue light that pulsed slowly, almost like a heartbeat. The soft glow illuminated the carved letters of his name, making them appear to float above the stone. Elaine scrambled backward, her heart racing. "This can't be happening," she whispered, but even as fear gripped her, she felt drawn to the light. It wasn't harsh or frightening. It was warm, comforting, like the nightlight Liam had insisted on keeping in his room. With trembling fingers, she reached out to touch the glowing tombstone. The stone felt warm beneath her fingertips, contrary to its usual cold surface. And then she heard it, so faint she almost missed it. The sound of a child's laughter carried on the still night air. "Liam?" Elaine gasped, pulling her hand back as if burned. She looked around wildly, but the cemetery remained empty. Yet the laughter had been so clear, so familiar, the exact way Liam used to giggle when she tickled him or when he was trying to hide during their games of hide-and-seek. "Hello?" she called out, her voice sounding small in the vast darkness. "Is someone there?" Only silence answered her, but the blue light continued to pulse steadily. Elaine felt tears streaming down her face, not tears of fear but of wonder and an emotion she couldn't quite name. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something other than crushing grief. She felt Connected. Mrs. Chen? The voice startled her so badly she nearly fell over. Spinning around, she found herself face to face with Mr. Abernathy, the elderly, cemetery groundskeeper. His weathered face was illuminated by the lantern he carried, deep wrinkles forming shadows across his features. "Mr. Abernathy, you scared me half to death," Elaine said, her hand pressed against her racing heart. "Forgive me, Mrs. Chen. I was making my rounds and saw someone sitting here." His eyes moved from her face to the glowing tombstone behind her. Unlike Elaine, he showed no surprise at the unusual sight. "Ah," he said simply, nodding as if confirming something to himself. Elaine gestured frantically at the grave. "Do you see that? The light? Am I losing my mind?" Mr. Abernathy's expression softened. "You're not losing your mind, Mrs. Chen. You're just seeing something most people never get to see. But what is it? Why is my son's grave glowing blue?" Her voice rose with panic and confusion. The old man lowered himself carefully onto a nearby bench, setting his lantern beside him. The blue light from Liam's grave cast strange shadows across his face, making him look almost otherworldly. "I've worked in this cemetery for nearly 50 years, he began, his voice deep and measured. "In all that time, I've only seen this happen 3 times, including tonight." Elaine sat beside him, unable to take her eyes off the pulsing blue light. "What does it mean?" "The old folks around here have a saying, 'Some promises transcend death itself.'" Mr. Abernathy looked at her thoughtfully. "Was there something you promised your boy? Something left undone?" The question hit Elaine like a physical blow. In Liam's final days, when the doctors had said there was nothing more they could do, when hope had given way to the terrible certainty of loss, she had made so many desperate promises. She would give anything, do anything if only he could stay. But those weren't the kind of promises anyone could keep. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Neither do I. Not fully," admitted Mr. Abernathy. "But I believe some bonds are too strong to be broken even by death. Some promises need to be kept even when it seems impossible." As they sat in silence, the blue light began to fade slightly, though it still pulsed with that strange heartbeat, rhythm. Elaine felt an overwhelming urge to protect it, to make sure it didn't disappear completely. "What happens now?" she asked. Mr. Abernathy stood with a small groan, picking up his lantern. "That depends on you, Mrs. Chen. The light came for a reason. If I were you, I'd come back tomorrow night and see if it appears again." "You're leaving?" Elaine asked, suddenly afraid to be alone with the glowing grave. "My old bones need rest, and I think you and your boy might need some time alone." He gave her a gentle smile. "Don't stay too late. The gates lock at 2 a.m. and I'd hate to have to come back and let you out." As the sound of his shuffling footsteps faded away, Elaine turned back to Liam's grave. The blue light continued to pulse, casting her shadow long across the ground. She had come here tonight seeking connection with her lost child, expecting only the cold comfort of memory. Instead, she had found something inexplicable, something that stirred both fear and hope in her heart. "Liam," she whispered, reaching out to touch the warm stone again. "If you're here somehow, if you can hear me, I miss you so much." This time, there was no laughter on the wind, no clear sign that her words reached beyond the veil that separated them. But as she sat there, surrounded by the gentle blue glow, Elaine felt a peace she hadn't experienced since losing him. When she finally stood to leave hours later, her legs stiff from sitting on the cold ground, the light had dimmed, but not disappeared entirely. She knew, with a certainty that defied explanation, that it would be waiting for her tomorrow night. Walking back through the cemetery, Elaine pulled out her phone and dialed a number she rarely called these days. After several rings, a groggy voice answered. "Elaine, it's almost 3 a.m. Is everything okay?" "Robert," she said, her voice steadier than it had been in years. "I need to tell you something. Something about Liam." As she passed through the cemetery gates, Elaine looked back one last time. In the distance, a small blue light pulsed beneath an old oak tree, like a beacon calling her home. Morning sunlight, streamed through Elaine's kitchen window as she stared into her untouched coffee. She hadn't slept at all after leaving the cemetery, her mind racing with questions about what she'd seen. The blue glow, the warmth of the tombstone, that fleeting sound of Liam's laughter. It all seemed like a dream now in the harsh light of day. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Robert's name flashed on the screen, making her stomach tighten. After their middle-of-the-night conversation, she wasn't surprised he was calling back. "Hello?" she answered, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Elaine, we need to talk about last night," Robert said, skipping any greeting. "I've been worried sick about you since your call. What's this about Liam's grave glowing?" She sighed, suddenly feeling foolish. How could she explain something she barely understood herself? "I know how it sounds, Robert, but I saw it with my own eyes. You were alone in a cemetery at midnight on the anniversary of our son's death," he said gently. "Grief can play tricks on the mind. Trust me, I know." "The groundskeeper saw it too," she countered. "Mr. Abernathy. The old man who's worked there forever? Elaine, he's got to be what, 80? Maybe his eyes aren't what they used to be." Elaine felt a flash of anger. It was so like Robert to try to explain everything away, to find the rational answer. It was one of the things that had driven them apart after Liam died. While she had drowned in her grief, Robert had organized the funeral, handled the medical bills, packed away Liam's things, all with a composure that had seemed almost cold to Elaine at the time. "I'm going back tonight," she said firmly. There was a long pause before Robert spoke again. "I'm driving down. I'll be there by evening." "You don't need—" "I do," he interrupted. "Either you're right and something unexplainable is happening at our son's grave, or you're struggling more than I realized. Either way, I should be there." After hanging up, Elaine moved through her morning routine like a sleepwalker. She called, in sick to the library where she worked, unable to face a day of shelving books and helping patrons while her mind was stuck in the cemetery. Instead, she found herself driving back there in broad daylight. Oakwood Cemetery looked different in daylight, less mysterious, more peaceful. A few visitors wandered between the graves, placing flowers or simply sitting in quiet contemplation. Elaine made her way to Liam's tombstone, which looked perfectly ordinary now. No trace of the blue glow remained. "Back so soon?" Elaine turned to find Mr. Abernathy raking leaves nearby. In daylight, he looked less mystical and more like what he was, an elderly man with kind eyes and work-worn hands. "I had to see it again," she admitted, "to make sure I wasn't imagining things." Mr. Abernathy leaned on his rake. "You weren't. But you won't see it now, only at midnight and only when it's needed." "When what's needed?" Elaine asked, stepping closer. "You said something last night about promises. What did you mean?" The old groundskeeper looked thoughtful. "Walk with me a bit. My old knees need movement to keep from stiffening up." They walked slowly along the winding paths of the cemetery, passing graves both new and old. Mr. Abernathy pointed out certain tombstones as they went. That one there belonged to Judge Patterson, lived to be 97. His tomb glowed purple for 3 nights straight back in '89. He gestured to another. "And over there, little May Wong, only 4 when she passed. Her stone shone bright red every midnight for a week in 2001. "And you saw both of these?" Elaine asked skeptically. "With these very eyes," he confirmed. "The judge's widow came every night until she figured it out. Turned out he'd promised to reveal where he'd hidden their wedding rings during the war. Once she found them, the glow stopped." He paused at a bench and sat down heavily. Little May's was sadder. Her mother had promised to tell her baby brother about her when he was old enough. She never did. Too painful, I expect. But once she finally showed him May's pictures and told him stories about his sister, the red light faded away. Elaine sat beside him, trying to process what he was saying. "You're telling me these glowing tombstones are about unfulfilled promises?" "That's what the old stories say." Mr. Abernathy nodded. "This cemetery's been here since 1842. Lots of stories buried with all these folks. My grandmother used to say that when a bond is strong enough and a promise important enough, even death can't stop it from wanting to be fulfilled. But I made so many promises to Liam." Elaine whispered, her eyes filling with tears. I promised. He'd get better. I promised the treatments wouldn't hurt. I promised. Her voice broke. Mr. Abernathy patted her hand gently. Not those kinds of promises, Mrs. Chen. Those were hopes, wishes. I'm talking about something specific, something you both understood was important, something left undone. Elaine closed, her eyes thinking back to those final days in the hospital. The beeping machines, the antiseptic smell, the way Liam had grown so thin, so pale. What had she promised him? I don't know, she admitted finally. But I'm going to find out. When Elaine returned home that afternoon, Robert's car was already in her driveway. She felt a strange mix of irritation and relief at seeing him waiting on her porch steps. They had been separated for nearly 2 years now. The grief of losing. Liam having carved a canyon between them that neither knew how to cross. You didn't need to come, she said as she approached. Robert stood, looking both familiar and like a stranger. His dark hair had more gray than she remembered, and new lines creased the corners of his eyes. You called me at 3 a.m. talking about glowing graves, he said. Where else would I be? Inside, they moved awkwardly around each other in the kitchen as Elaine made fresh coffee. This house had once been their home together, but now Robert looked out of place among her things. So tell me everything, he said as they sat at the kitchen table. Every detail. Elaine described the blue light, the warmth of the stone, the sound of Liam's laughter. She told him about Mr. Abernathy and the stories of other glowing tombs. To his credit, Robert listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. You think I'm crazy, she concluded. Robert shook his head slowly. I think you believe what you saw, and I think I need to see it for myself. As evening approached, Elaine pulled out a box she rarely opened, Liam's memory box. Inside were photos, drawings, his favorite small toys, the hospital bracelet from his final stay. She and Robert sat on the living room floor, spreading out the mementos of their son's short life. Remember this day? Robert asked, holding up a photo of Liam at the beach, his gap-toothed smile wide as he held up a starfish. His first time seeing the ocean? Elaine smiled. He collected so many shells we had to buy that extra bucket. And he insisted on naming every single one. Robert laughed softly. They continued through the box, sharing memories that hurt a little less when held between them. Near the bottom, Elaine found a folder of papers from the hospital, drawings Liam had made during his long stays there. I forgot about these, she murmured, opening the folder carefully. The drawings were typical of a 7-year-old, wobbly stick figures, houses with smoke curling from chimneys, bright yellow suns in the corner of every page. But one drawing caught Elaine's eye. It showed a night sky filled with green and blue swirls, with 2 stick figures underneath looking up. What's this one? Robert asked, looking over her shoulder. Elaine's hands began to tremble. The Northern Lights, she whispered. Oh my God, Robert. I promised to take him to see the Northern Lights. The memory rushed back with such force that Elaine gasped. During one of Liam's better periods, they had watched a nature documentary together. The segment on the aurora borealis had captivated him completely. Mommy, can we go see those lights someday? He had asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Of course we can, baby, she had promised, kissing his forehead. When you're all better, we'll go to Norway and watch them together. But he never got better. And she had forgotten the promise entirely. Robert took the drawing from her shaking hands. This is us, he said softly, pointing to the stick figures. You and Liam, Elaine shook her head. No, look closer, there are 3 figures. It's you, me, and Liam. He wanted us all to go together. Robert stared at the drawing, his eyes filling with tears. He was always trying to keep us together, wasn't he? Even when things started falling apart between us. As midnight approached, they drove to the cemetery in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the dark sky like distant diamonds. They made their way to Liam's grave and waited. The church bells began to toll midnight, and with the first sound, a faint blue glow appeared around the edges of the tombstone. By the 12th bell, The entire grave was illuminated with the same pulsing light Elaine had seen the night before. "Oh my God," Robert breathed, his face pale in the blue light. "It's real." Elaine knelt beside the glowing stone. "We know now, Liam," she whispered. "We remember our promise." The blue light seemed to pulse more strongly for a moment, and both Elaine and Robert felt a warm breeze touch their faces, carrying the faintest sound of childish laughter. "What do we do now?" Robert asked, his voice unsteady. Elaine looked up, at the starry sky, then back at the glowing tomb of their son. "We keep our promise," she said simply. "We go see the northern lights." "You can't just quit your job, Elaine," Robert said, watching her pack clothes into a suitcase the next morning. The early sunlight streamed through her bedroom window, illuminating the determination on her face. "I already did," she replied, folding a heavy sweater. "I called my boss first thing. I have 3 weeks of vacation saved up anyway." Robert ran his hands through his hair in frustration. He had spent the night on her couch, neither of them able to sleep much after what they'd witnessed at the cemetery. The blue glow of Liam's tombstone had changed everything. "Look, I believe what we saw." "I do," he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "But we need to think this through. Norway's expensive, and it's not even the right season for the northern lights. We'd need to wait until winter." Elaine stopped packing and looked at him directly. "I've waited 3 years too long already. I'm not waiting another day." Her voice softened. The promise was to see them together, you, me, and Liam. His tomb is glowing because that promise matters to him even now. Robert's expression changed. "You think he's still here somehow? Still aware?" "I don't know," Elaine admitted. "But something is happening that science can't explain. And after what we saw last night, are you really going to tell me it's just grief or imagination?" Before Robert could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and winced. "It's work. I need to take this." He stepped out of the room, leaving Elaine to continue packing. When he returned 10 minutes later, his face was tight with stress. "My boss isn't happy. I told him I needed a family emergency leave." "What did he say?" Elaine asked, pausing her packing. "He reminded me that I've only been at the firm for 8 months and I'm still on probation." Robert shrugged. "But he gave me a week. Not 3, but it's something." Elaine sat down on the bed, suddenly feeling the weight of what they were planning. "You don't have to come. This was my promise to keep." "Our promise," Robert corrected. Look at the drawing. All 3 of us were supposed to go. Besides," his voice grew quieter, "I've spent 3 years running from anything that reminded me of him. Maybe it's time I stopped running." They spent the rest of the day making arrangements. Robert researched flights while Elaine contacted hotels in Tromsø, Norway, supposedly one of the best places in the world to see the northern lights. The prices made them both wince, but neither suggested canceling. "We should talk to Dr. Williams before we go," Robert said as they sat at the kitchen table surrounded by printouts and notes. "He was Liam's doctor for so long. Maybe there's something we missed, some other promise we made." Elaine nodded, though she felt certain they had found the right one. The drawing of the northern lights had triggered such a clear memory. Liam's excited face as he watched the documentary, his small voice asking if they could see the lights someday, her easy promise that they would. Dr. Williams agreed to see them that afternoon. His pediatric oncology office was painfully familiar to both of them. The colorful walls, the toys in the waiting room, the gentle nurses who still remembered them. They had spent countless hours here during Liam's illness. Elaine, Robert, Dr. Williams greeted them warmly in his office. The kind-faced doctor had aged in the past 3 years, more gray in his beard, more lines around his eyes. "It's good to see you both together," he added with a note of surprise. They explained about their planned trip to Norway, careful to leave out the glowing tombstone. Instead, they talked about healing, about fulfilling a promise to Liam that had been left undone. Dr. Williams listened thoughtfully. I think it's a wonderful idea. Grief doesn't have a timeline, but finding ways to honor Liam's memory is healthy. He hesitated. There's actually something I've wanted to tell you both for a long time. Something about Liam's final weeks. Elaine felt her heart tighten. What is it? The doctor opened a drawer and pulled out a small notebook. Liam asked me to keep a secret from you two. I wasn't comfortable with it, but he was very persuasive for a 7-year-old. A secret? Robert asked. He made me promise not to tell you how scared he was, Dr. Williams said softly. He kept this journal during his last month. He wrote in it when you weren't in the room, telling me things he didn't want you to know. He pushed the notebook across the desk. He wanted to protect you both from more pain. He thought if you knew how frightened he was of dying, it would hurt you too much. With trembling hands, Elaine opened the notebook. Inside, in Liam's wobbly handwriting, were short entries. Today I asked Dr. Williams if heaven has toys. He said yes. I hope so because I'm bringing Rocket Bear with me. I'm scared to go to sleep. Sometimes. What if I don't wake up? But I don't tell Mommy. She cries in the bathroom when she thinks I can't hear. Daddy brought me a new space book today. I pretended I wasn't too tired to read it. He looked happy. Tears blurred Elaine's vision as she passed the notebook to Robert. Their son had been protecting them even as he faced his own mortality. He was so brave, Dr. Williams said. Braver than many adults I've known. He was worried about you two staying together. He mentioned several times that he wanted you both to be okay, to take care of each other after he was gone. Robert closed the notebook, his face ashen. We failed him there. We couldn't even take care of each other. It's not too late, Dr. Williams said gently. This trip you're planning, it sounds like exactly what Liam would have wanted. A chance for both of you to heal together. As they left the office, Robert carried the notebook carefully, as if it contained something infinitely precious. In the parking lot, they stood awkwardly beside their cars. Will you come to the cemetery tonight? Elaine asked. To see if it's still glowing? Robert nodded. I'll be there, and I'll bring the travel confirmations. I managed to book our flights. While you were packing, we leave in 3 days. That night, they stood together at Liam's grave as the midnight bells tolled. Once again, the blue light appeared, pulsing gently around the tombstone. But this time, they noticed something different. Tiny specks of green intermingled with the blue like the beginning of an aurora. It's changing, Elaine whispered. It knows we're going to keep our promise. Robert reached for her hand in the darkness, a gesture so familiar, yet so long forgotten. She took it, and they stood connected by their shared loss and their shared purpose. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparations. They visited the cemetery each midnight, watching as the blue glow gradually became streaked with more green. On the third night, their last before the flight, Mr. Abernathy joined them. You figured it out, the old groundskeeper said with satisfaction. Not everyone does. Will the light go away when we fulfill our promise? Elaine asked. Mr. Abernathy nodded. That's how it works. The light stays until the promise is kept. Then the spirits can rest easy. Do you really believe that? Robert E. asked. That spirits can't rest if promises are broken? The old man looked up at the stars. I've seen enough in my years here to believe that love doesn't end when the heart stops beating. Whatever's left of us, call it a soul, a memory, an echo. It cares about the promises we made. Their journey began early the next morning. The flight from Chicago to Oslo was long, and from there they took a smaller plane to Tromsø, arriving as darkness fell over the Norwegian city. They were exhausted, but too wired to sleep, checking into their small hotel with views of the harbor. We should join a Northern Lights tour, Robert said, spreading brochures on the hotel bed. They take you away from the city lights, out where you can see better. Elaine stood by the window, looking out at the unfamiliar city with its snow-covered streets and colorful buildings. We're really here, she said wonderingly. I still can't believe we're doing this. For Liam, Robert said. For all of us, Elaine corrected him. They booked a tour for the following night and spent the day exploring Tromsø, taking in the Arctic Cathedral with its beautiful triangular architecture and visiting the Polar Museum to learn about Arctic explorers. It felt strange to be tourists, to be doing something so normal after the supernatural events that had brought them here. That night, bundled in their warmest clothes, they joined a small group of tourists in a minibus that took them far from the city lights. Their guide was a woman named Astrid, whose cheerful face was framed by a fur-lined hood. The aurora is never guaranteed, she warned as they drove along dark roads. But conditions tonight are good. Clear skies, strong solar activity. We have a good chance. They stopped at a clearing surrounded by pine trees with open views of the northern sky. Astrid set up a small camp with thermoses of hot chocolate and reindeer hides to sit on. The cold was intense, far sharper than the winter chill they were used to in Chicago. Now we wait, Astrid told the group. The lights come when they choose. Elaine and Robert sat close together on a hide, sipping hot chocolate to stay warm. Above them, stars blazed with a brightness they never saw in the city. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional crunch of snow as someone moved around. "Do you think it will happen?" Elaine whispered. "What if we came all this way and don't see them?" Robert's breath made clouds in the frigid air. "Then, we try again tomorrow night, and the next, we're keeping our promise either way." An hour passed, then another. Some of the tourists grew restless, retreating to the warmth of the minibus. But Elaine and Robert remained, their eyes fixed on the northern sky. And then it began. A faint green glow on the horizon, so subtle at first they weren't sure it was real. But it grew, stretching upward into the night sky, a ribbon of green, light that began to move and dance. "There!" Astrid called excitedly. "The Lady Aurora comes to visit us tonight." The entire group watched in awe as the green light strengthened, joined by hints of purple and blue. They swirled and pulsed across the sky in waves as if painted by an invisible hand. Tears froze on Elaine's cheeks as she watched. "Liam," she whispered, "we made it, baby. We're seeing the lights just like we promised." Robert put his arm around her shoulders, his own eyes wet with tears. "It's more beautiful than I imagined," he said hoarsely. As they watched the celestial display, both felt a strange warmth despite the freezing temperature, a warmth that seemed to come from within. And for just a moment, in the dancing lights, above, Elaine thought she saw a pattern that looked like a small boy with outstretched arms reaching for the stars. Elaine woke to sunlight filtering through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment she was disoriented, the small hotel room strange around her. Then the memories of the previous night flooded back. The dancing lights in the sky, the tears freezing. On her cheeks, the feeling of Robert's arm around her shoulders as they watched the aurora together. They had seen the northern lights. They had kept their promise to Liam. She sat up slowly, noticing Robert asleep in the other bed. His face looked younger in sleep, the worry lines smoothed away. They had barely spoken on the ride back to the hotel, both lost in their own thoughts, overwhelmed by the beauty they had witnessed and the emotion it had stirred. Elaine's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Mr. Abernathy back home. "Did you see them?" She typed back quickly. "Yes, they were beautiful. More than we ever imagined." 3 dots appeared as he typed a response. "And the tomb?" Elaine paused. They had been so caught up in their journey that she hadn't considered what might be happening back at Oakwood Cemetery. Was Liam's grave still glowing? Had the colors changed again? She realized she had no way of knowing. "We're still in Norway," she replied. "Can you check for us tonight?" "Will do," came the immediate response. Robert stirred and opened his eyes, blinking in the morning light. "Hey," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Hey," Elaine replied. "I was just texting Mr. Abernathy. He's going to check Liam's grave tonight to see if anything's changed." Robert sat up, running a hand through his rumpled hair. "Do you think it stopped glowing, now that we've seen the lights?" "I don't know," Elaine admitted. "Part of me hopes it has, because that would mean Liam is at peace. But another part of me..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Doesn't want to lose that connection, Robert finished for her. I get it. I feel the same way. They got dressed and went downstairs for breakfast. The hotel's small dining room was busy with other tourists, many of whom had also been out viewing the aurora the night before. The excitement in the room was palpable, everyone sharing photos and videos of what they'd seen. What should we do today? Robert asked as they sipped their coffee. Our flight isn't until tomorrow afternoon. Elaine looked out the window at the snow-covered town. I think I'd like to find a gift shop. I want to get something to bring back, something to, I don't know, mark this trip somehow. They spent the morning wandering through Tromsø's shops, eventually finding a small store that specialized in local crafts. Elaine was immediately drawn to a hand-carved wooden box with the aurora painted on its lid in swirls of green and blue. It's beautiful, the shopkeeper told her in accented English. The artist uses special paint that glows in the dark. If you turn off the lights, it looks almost like the real thing. Elaine bought it without hesitation, along with a small glass snowflake ornament that caught the light in rainbow patterns. As they left the shop, she realized she was crying again. What's wrong? Robert asked, concerned. Nothing's wrong, she said, wiping at her tears. It's just, I keep thinking about how excited Liam would have been by all of this. The lights, the snow, even the long plane ride. He would have loved every minute. Robert nodded, his own eyes growing wet. He would have had a million questions for Astrid last night. Remember how he always wanted to know the why of everything? And the how and the what if? Elaine smiled through her tears. He wore out that book of space facts you gave him, reading it until the pages started falling out. They continued walking, sharing memories of their son that somehow hurt less here, in this place so far from home. The pain was still there, it would always be there, but it felt different now, less sharp, more like a familiar weight they had learned to carry. That afternoon they joined another tour group, this time to visit a Sami reindeer farm. The indigenous Sami people had herded reindeer in the Arctic for thousands of years, and the tour offered a glimpse into their traditional way of life. As they rode in a sled pulled by reindeer across the snowy landscape, Elaine found herself laughing for what felt like the first time in years. The simple joy of the experience, the beauty of the white hills around them, the clear blue sky overhead. It all combined to create a moment of unexpected happiness. Liam would have thought this was the coolest thing ever, Robert said, echoing her thoughts. He would have wanted to drive the sled himself, Elaine agreed. Remember how he always wanted to do everything on his own? The most independent kid in the world, Robert nodded. Even in the hospital, he wanted to push his own freestand. After returning to Tromsø, they had dinner at a small restaurant overlooking the harbor. The city lights reflected in the dark water, and fishing boats bobbed gently at their moorings. The waitress brought them a traditional Norwegian fish stew that warmed them from the inside out. I'm glad we came, Robert said, breaking a long but comfortable silence. Not just for Liam, but for us too. Elaine nodded. I think we needed this. To remember him together instead of apart. I'm sorry I left, Robert said suddenly, his voice low. After the funeral, I couldn't handle it. The house, his room, seeing you in pain. It was all too much. Running away seemed easier. I was angry at you for so long, Elaine admitted. I felt abandoned, but I understand now. We each grieved in our own way. Mine was to stay close to everything that reminded me of him. Yours was to get distance. Neither way was right or wrong, Robert said, just different. As they walked back to the hotel in the crisp night air, Robert tentatively reached for Elaine's hand. She hesitated for just a moment before taking it, their gloved fingers intertwining as they had so many times before. When they reached the hotel, Elaine's phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Abernathy. Something's changed. Call when you can. Her heart racing, she called immediately, putting the phone on speaker so Robert could hear. Mrs. Chen, the old groundskeeper, answered. I went to check on Liam's grave at midnight, just like you asked. And? Elaine prompted when he paused. It's still glowing, Mr. Abernathy said. But it's different now. The blue is almost gone. It's mostly green, like those northern lights you described. And there's something else, something I've never seen before. What is it? Robert asked, leaning closer to the phone. There's a shape in the light, the old man said, his voice filled with wonder. Like a small figure. Just for a few seconds. But I saw it clear as day. A child with his arms raised up like he was reaching for something, or maybe like he was dancing, Elaine whispered, remembering the pattern she thought she'd seen in the aurora the night before. Yes, Mr. Abernathy agreed. Exactly like that. Like he was dancing in the light. After hanging up, Elaine and Robert sat in silence on the edge of the bed, processing what they'd heard. He's still there, Elaine said finally. The tomb is still glowing. But it's changing, Robert pointed out. The colors are shifting to match what we saw in the sky. That has to mean something. Elaine reached into her bag and pulled out the wooden box she'd bought earlier. In the dim hotel room, she could see the painted aurora on its lid glowing faintly with its special paint. I bought this for Liam, she realized. Not for us, not as a souvenir. I wanted to bring a piece of this back to him. Robert nodded in understanding. We should take it to his grave when we get home. That night, they decided to try seeing the northern lights one more time, but on their own instead of with a tour group. They rented a car and drove out of the city, following directions Astrid had given them to a good viewing spot that wasn't too far away. The night was even colder than the previous one, the temperature well below freezing. They parked on a small hill overlooking a frozen lake, the landscape around them silent and still in the darkness. What if they don't appear tonight? Robert asked as they waited, huddled together in the car with the heater running. Then we've still kept our promise, Elaine said. We came to see them and we did, once is enough. But they didn't have to worry. Within an hour the lights began to appear, first as a faint glow on the horizon, then stretching upward in ribbons, of green and pink that danced across the stars. This time, instead of watching in stunned silence, they got out of the car to get a better view. The cold hit them like a physical force, but neither cared. Standing side by side, they watched the cosmic display, more vibrant and active than the night before. Liam! Elaine called out suddenly, her voice echoing across the frozen landscape. We see them. We're keeping our promise. Robert joined in, shouting into the night sky. We're here, buddy, just like we said we would be. Their voices seemed small beneath the vast aurora, but they continued calling out to their son, telling him about the lights, about Norway, about how much they missed him. Their words turned to clouds in the freezing air, rising up toward the dancing lights above. And then something extraordinary happened. A bright ribbon of green light seemed to separate from the main aurora, swirling downward toward them in a spiral pattern. It was so unusual that they both gasped, instinctively stepping back. The light moved around them in a circle, as if examining them, before rising back up to rejoin the main display. The entire sequence lasted maybe 10 seconds, but to Elaine and Robert it felt like time had stopped. Did you see that? Robert whispered, his voice shaking. Elaine couldn't speak, could only nod. What they had just witnessed defied explanation. A tendril of the aurora seemingly responding to their calls, coming down to earth as if to touch them before returning to the sky. That was him, she said finally, absolute certainty in her voice. Somehow that was Liam. Robert didn't argue. He had felt it too. A presence, a connection, something beyond rational understanding. He put his arm around Elaine, and they stood together in the biting cold, watching the lights until they began to fade with the approach of dawn. Back in the car, with the heater blasting and feeling returning painfully to their frozen fingers and toes, they sat in contemplative silence. What happens when we go home? Robert asked eventually. To us, I mean. Elaine looked at him, really looked at him for perhaps the first time in years. She saw the grief that had aged him, but also the love that had never truly died. Love for their son and maybe, still, for her. I don't know, she admitted. But I think we've both been stuck in the same moment for 3 years. Maybe it's time we found a way to move forward, not to forget, never that, but to live again. As they drove back toward Tromsø in the early morning light, they passed a small church with a beautiful stained glass window that caught the sunrise, sending colored light across the snow. They stopped the car by mutual unspoken agreement and went inside. The church was empty and peaceful. They sat in a pew near the back, not speaking, just being together in the quiet. And for the first time since losing Liam, they both felt something that had been missing for too long. A sense of peace, fragile but real, and the faint glimmer of hope for tomorrow. The journey home felt different. As their plane descended toward Chicago, Elaine gazed out the window at the familiar landscape below, feeling both changed and the same. Beside her, Robert was flipping through the photos they'd taken in Norway. The northern lights, the snowy mountains, the two of them smiling, with a reindeer in the background. Simple tourist pictures that somehow contained so much more. "Do you think it worked?" Robert asked quietly. "Do you think Liam knows we kept our promise?" Elaine thought about the strange tendril of light that had seemed to reach down toward them, circling them before rejoining the aurora above. "I think he knows," she said. "I felt it. Didn't you?" Robert nodded. "I did, but I'm nervous about going to the cemetery tonight. What if the glow is gone? What if this is really goodbye?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. They had spent 3 years unable to properly say goodbye to their son, caught in a limbo of grief that neither could escape. Now, they might finally have to face it. "Then we say goodbye," Elaine said, finding strength she didn't know she had, but not to everything, not to his memory, not to who we were as a family. Robert reached for her hand across the armrest. "And not to each other?" She interlaced her fingers with his, a simple gesture that felt both familiar and new. "Not to each other," she agreed. It was evening by the time they reached Elaine's house. They were exhausted from the long flight, but too anxious about visiting the cemetery to rest. After quickly unpacking and changing clothes, they drove to Oakwood Cemetery, arriving just before midnight. Mr. Abernathy was waiting for them at the gates, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw them. "Welcome back, travelers," he greeted them. "How was the land of the midnight sun?" "Beautiful," Elaine said. "Like nothing we've ever seen." The old groundskeeper nodded. "Some things can't be described, only experienced." He gestured toward the cemetery. "He's been waiting for you." They walked the now familiar path to Liam's grave in silence. The night was mild for early spring, the stars partly obscured by thin clouds. When they reached the tombstone, everything looked normal. No glow, no sign of the supernatural. "It's not glowing," Robert said, disappointment clear in his voice. "Wait for midnight," Mr. Abernathy advised. "It only starts with the bells." The minutes crawled by. Elaine placed the wooden box with the aurora painted on its lid at the base of the tombstone. Inside, she had put the glass snowflake ornament and a small card with a simple message: "We kept our promise. We love you forever." The distant church bells began to toll. 1, 2, 3. They all watched intently, hardly breathing. By the 6th toll, a faint green glow began to appear around the edges of the tombstone. 7, 8, 9. The glow strengthened, but it was different from before. Not the solid blue of the first night, nor the mixed blue-green of later nights, but a rippling, dancing green light that moved across the stone surface like the aurora itself. 10, 11, 12. As the final bell tolled, the green light enveloped the entire grave, pulsing and swirling. And then, just as Mr. Abernathy had described, a shape formed within the light, the distinct silhouette of a small boy, arms raised as if in joy or greeting. "Liam," Elaine whispered, tears streaming down her face. The figure seemed to turn toward them, and though it had no distinct features, they both felt the unmistakable sensation of being seen, of being recognized. The small shape moved toward the wooden box Elaine had left, hovering over it for a moment before rising up like smoke. As they watched, breathless, The silhouette began to change. The green light shifted, colors dancing through it, blues, purples, pinks, until it looked exactly like a miniature version of the northern lights they had seen in Norway. This spectral aurora danced above the grave for several heartbeats, before slowly beginning to fade. "He's saying goodbye," Mr. Abernathy said softly. The light dimmed gradually, the colors becoming fainter until only the faintest green glow remained around the edges of the tombstone. And then, with what sounded like a distant child's laugh carried on the wind, even that disappeared, leaving the grave in darkness. Robert's hand found Elaine's, gripping it tightly. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Mr. Abernathy nodded. "The promise has been kept. The spirit can rest now." They stood in silence for a long time, none of them willing to be the first to leave. Finally, Mr. Abernathy touched each of their shoulders gently. "I'll give you some time alone," he said, walking away toward the cemetery gates. When he was gone, Elaine knelt beside the tombstone, touching it gently. It felt like ordinary stone now, cold, solid, lifeless. "Goodbye, sweet boy," she whispered. "I hope you're dancing in those lights forever." Robert knelt beside her. "We love you, Liam. Always will." As they walked back through the cemetery, Elaine felt a strange mixture of sadness and peace. The supernatural connection they had experienced was gone, but something else had taken its place. A certainty that their son had somehow found a way to reach them one last time, to make sure they fulfilled a promise that mattered to him, and perhaps to help heal the rift between them. "Will you stay tonight?" she asked Robert as they approached their cars. Just to talk. I'm not ready to be alone." He nodded, relief evident in his expression. "I'd like that." Back at Elaine's house, they sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea, the wooden box from Norway between them. In the dim light, the painted aurora on its lid glowed faintly, reminding them of what they had seen, both in Norway and at the grave. "What do we do now?" Robert asked after a long silence. Elaine considered the question. For 3 years, her life had been defined by grief, by the daily ritual of surviving another day without Liam. Now something had shifted. She felt different, not healed, not over it, but changed in a fundamental way she couldn't quite explain. "I think," she said slowly, "we start living again. Not the same as before, we can't go back to that, but something new." "Together?" Robert asked, the question tentative, hopeful. Elaine looked at him, really looked at the man she had loved, lost, and perhaps found again in the strangest of circumstances. "I'd like to try," she said. Not rushing, not pretending the past didn't happen, but yes, together somehow. 6 months later, Elaine stood in her backyard, watching as Robert hung lights in the old oak tree that dominated the space. It was a perfect fall day, the air crisp and the leaves turning golden. "A little higher on the left," she called up to him. "We want them to be even." Robert adjusted the string of lights, securing them to the branch. "How's that?" "Perfect." She smiled. They had been working on the yard for weeks, transforming it into something special. Today was the official opening of Liam's Light Garden, a small but beautiful space they had created in their son's memory. The yard was filled with light-catching crystals, glow-in-the-dark stepping stones, and solar lamps that would illuminate the space at night. At its center stood a small plaque, in memory of Liam Chen, who taught us that some lights never go out. They had invited neighbors, friends, family, Liam's former teachers, and Dr. Williams to the opening. Even Mr. Abernathy had promised to come, though he rarely left the cemetery these days. As evening approached and guests began to arrive, Elaine felt nervous. This was the first time she and Robert had hosted anything since Liam's death. It felt like a public statement. Not that they were moving on, but that they were finding a way to carry their son's memory forward with them. Dr. Williams arrived with a small tree to plant in the garden. "A Norwegian maple," he explained. "I thought it was fitting." Liam's kindergarten teacher brought a wind chime made by her current students, each piece painted with stars and moons. Other guests brought candles, lanterns, or simply their presence and support. As darkness fell, Robert gathered everyone around. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "Elaine and I wanted to create this space not just to remember Liam, but to celebrate how he brought light into all our lives. He loved anything that glowed, or shined or sparkled." His voice caught briefly. "We hope this garden can be a place of peace for anyone who needs it." Elaine stepped forward and flipped a switch. Suddenly, the entire yard was illuminated with hundreds of tiny lights. In the trees along the paths around the flower beds, solar-powered lights in the ground created patterns that looked remarkably like stars. And at the center, the small wooden box from Norway sat on a pedestal, its painted aurora glowing in the darkness. There were murmurs of appreciation and a few tears among the guests. They wandered through the garden, sharing memories of Liam, admiring the lights, finding comfort in the beauty that had been created from grief. Later, after everyone had gone, Elaine and Robert sat on a bench in the glowing garden. Above them, the real stars shone in the clear night sky. "Do you think he would have liked it?" Robert asked. Elaine nodded. "He would have loved it. Probably would have wanted to sleep out here every night." They sat in comfortable silence, their shoulders touching, sharing the moment and the memory of their son. "I never thought I could feel this way again," Elaine said after a while. "Not happy exactly, but at peace. Like I can breathe again." "I know," Robert agreed. "It's like carrying something very heavy for a long time and then finding a better way to hold it. It's still there, but it doesn't crush you anymore." Elaine leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm glad we kept our promise," she said. "Not just for Liam, but for us too." Above them, a shooting star streaked across the sky, a brief, brilliant light against the darkness. They both saw it, both made the same wish, not for the past to change, but for the strength to face whatever came next, together, and somewhere perhaps in the dancing lights of the far north, or in the glow of the garden they had built, or simply in the love that remained in their hearts. A little boy was smiling, his promise fulfilled, his parents healing, his light never truly gone.